David, as you know, there was a big election in Argentina with a very colorful figure who is now leading that country. And he has some very colorful plans for their economy, including getting rid of Argentina's currency and actually going to a dollarized economy.
Yeah, no more peso if Dr. Milei has his way. He's in actually the U.S. this week before he gets inaugurated. But the question is, what does dollarization of Argentina really accomplish, and can it be done? To answer some of those questions, welcome now Eswar Prasad. He's Senior Professor of Trade Policy at Cornell University and a Senior Fellow at Brooking Institution. He is also, importantly, the author of The Future of Money. So, Dr. Prasad, thank you so much for being back with us. So let's start with the most basic thing. This wasn't a popular idea, evidently, in the election in Argentina. If they could do dollarization, what would it accomplish?
So the objective of dollarization seems to be, as President Milei has put it, to try to get rid of a currency that he has characterized as worthless, and he's used even stronger language. Now, the reality is that the Argentinian peso has not been doing well because of government policies that have been quite spendthrift. There have been very large levels of external debt, domestic debt, and so on. And dollarization is seen as a way of restoring confidence in the country to some extent by getting rid of a currency that is sort of seen as symptomatic of the country's problems. I don't think it's going to essentially solve anything. It will certainly put some constraints on the Argentinian central bank's ability to print money in order to finance government deficits. So it'll certainly lock in monetary policy in place. It will reduce inflation, but will it really solve the fundamental problems of the Argentinian economy, which is really about a government that is not doing its job of managing the public finances? Not quite. There is also the question of whether it is feasible, because in order to conduct dollarization, you need to have enough dollars in the first place so you can convert your existing monetary base into that currency. And right now, Argentina is very, very short of dollars. I'm not quite sure it can even make the transition if it wanted to.
So Eswar, I'm curious about the central bank. You referred to the central bank. If that's part of the weakness of it, he has a plan for that as well, which is basically to eliminate the central bank, not have it there at all. If, in fact, he did that, he went to dollars instead of pesos, and he eliminated the central bank, how would that play out? What would they do to the banking system? What would they do to individuals living in Argentina?
So there is a transitional issue, David, and then the longer-term issue. The transitional issue is that given that the Argentinian economy is de facto dollarized, you might think that there isn't really a problem in terms of switching to a de jure dollar regime as well, because after all, most people in Argentina are using dollars. But the reality is that pesos still do play a very important role in the Argentinian economy, especially in the Argentinian financial system. So if all of a sudden you were to try to replace pesos with dollars, that could have pretty serious consequences for the banking system if it does not have access to dollars that it needs to manage its commitments. Then there is a longer-term issue about whether tying Argentina's monetary policy to U.S. monetary policy, which would in effect be what Argentina is doing if it adopts a dollar as a national currency, is good for Argentina in the long run. Certainly, it would reduce the probability of the central bank being able to print money to finance government deficits. That would certainly bring inflation down, but it would mean that in the future, Argentina is constricted in terms of being able to use monetary policy, including the exchange rate, in order to buffer itself against various shocks that might hit the economy. So it will put a straitjacket in the economy, and this could end actually disastrously if you do move to a dollarized regime and the government tries to continue with its fiscal excesses, if it doesn't rein in its spending, if it tries to get around its domestic and external debt burdens through default, that could actually lead to money fleeing from the economy. So you might have low inflation, but an economy and financial system that are collapsing.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm curious about. I mean, because this really isn't theory anymore. I mean, we have several countries that have currently doing this, others that have tried and abandoned it. And when we just had on the screen, Professor, some of the other countries that I guess represent some of the worst performing currencies, and it had Lebanon on there. And I was thinking about their move to kind of do that incremental dollarization where effectively you start in certain industries and then try to roll it out. And I know, at least based on our reporting, that's pretty much been a disaster so far this year. And I'm wondering, is there any roadmap at all that Milei could have where he could actually successfully pull this off?
So one question is whether if Argentina was willing to undertake all the policies that it needs to undertake in order to for dollarization to succeed, whether it would still need dollarization. Because if you do all the right things, You could have dollarization work. You could bring down inflation. You could also undertake a broader set of, fiscal and as well as other types of structural reforms, including reforms to the health, education, and pension systems, which Argentina really needs. But if you can do all of that, then the question is, do you need dollarization? But the difficulty, of course, right now is that those reforms are politically very difficult. I mean, Milei has been elected as president with a thumping majority, but he doesn't have much control of Congress, which has to pass many of these legislative actions that he is proposing. So perhaps his end game here really is to talk about dollarization as something that he would be willing to inflict on the Argentinian economy and perhaps use it as a bargaining chip in order to push Argentina towards all the reforms it really needs. It's a very dangerous strategy, but at one level, given where Argentina is right now in terms of the political status, maybe it's the only card he really has left to play.
But does the size of the Argentine economy actually work against him in this case? I mean, I was just trying to go down the list of countries that have gone through this, and I really couldn't find one that actually had the same level of economy that would require, effectively, as you mentioned earlier, a huge purchase of dollars that I'm just not sure they're going to be able to do.
That's going to be very difficult. And you're absolutely right, Romaine, that there are smaller economies that have either de facto or de jure dollarized. There are many in the Latin American region as well, at least a couple, including Ecuador. So this is at one level a desperate measure by a desperate government to try to revive an ailing economy and bring down inflation. But for an economy the size of Argentina, to attempt this would certainly be an enormous challenge. And right now, the difficulty is that the Argentinian central bank does not have any dollars to play with, either to pay off its external debts or to facilitate a shift towards dollarization. The official gross foreign exchange reserves are somewhere in the range of $30 to $40 billion, but the net reserves, that is the dollars that Argentina actually has to be able to conduct this transaction, are seen to be somewhat negative because of all the commitments the central bank and the government have made more broadly. So even the transition is going to be very difficult, and you're absolutely right. To get enough dollars for the currency to become the de facto and de jure currency of the entire Argentinian economy, that's going to be a very difficult challenge.